will not take a dime from Washington lobbyists or special interest PACs. We're going to change how Washington works.
This president's record is unprecedented in terms of his rejection of money from PACs and lobbyists.
It doesn't pass the smell test. And if the president really wants to be the president of reform, the president of ethical values, he needs to stand up and say, whoa.
Say whoa. Let's bring in our panel. Jonah Goldberg, at-large editor of National Review Online. Charles Lane, editorial writer for the Washington Post. And David Drucker, reporter for Roll Call. What Mr. Edgar is saying whoa about is the fact that the president said he wasn't going to raise any money from lobbyists. But as it turns out, he's raising money from people who are not registered as lobbyists, but are in the lobbying business, a fine distinction that some of the Occupy Wall Street people may not have appreciated. So what do you make of this, David? What is going on here?
Well, I think the president's failing to live up to a standard he never needed to set. Nobody in Washington believes that you can do anything in this town without lobbyists, and that's because usually a lobbyist is somebody who started out as a Hill staffer, somebody who worked for a congressman or a senator.
Or a member of Congress in many cases.
Yeah, and they learned a particular issue, but the vast number are not former members, but they're the ones we always hear about. They learned a particular issue, whether it was environmental issues, labor issues, business issues, energy issues. They go downtown, they work for a firm, and they lobby on behalf of their clients. And by the way, the Constitution says, lobby the government. It's your right. And so you're trying to do something that then says, when I set up an administration, I'm not going to hire any of the foremost experts in all of the fields that I need to take care of. And when it's time to run for re-election, the people that know how things are done, that know where the money is in terms of the need to raise money, because that's what you need to do in America when you run for office, I'm not going to use them either. It was something that was never possible, and if he wouldn't have set the standard, nobody would care and would be saying, why aren't you living up to this standard? And that's why I find the whole thing so amusing.
Charles.
Well, you know, Mitt Romney takes his money from lobbyists too, but they're registered lobbyists, so it's okay. I mean, it's silly. I mean, Mitt Romney is, our paper reported today, taking campaign contributions from 107 registered lobbyists. Big deal. All of these guys, lobbyists, are in politics full-time. They contribute to candidates. Candidates take their money. I'm with David. Obama's being hoisted by his own petard here. He set himself up for this.
Yeah, you know, in other news, bears continue to use our national forests as toilets. But at the same time, you know, Obama created this, and the funny thing is, it's weird how all of a sudden we're noticing that he is this Wall Street guy when he took more money from Wall Street than any candidate in 20 years when he ran in 2008. His Treasury Department has not exactly been an enemy of Goldman Sachs. He's been picking up these kinds of guys to work for his campaign. It's a silly standard, but it's a standard that can only really hurt him if either the mainstream media or either the Occupy Wall Street crowd or somebody else on the Democratic side really starts to care about it. Well, and I don't think they're going to.
It was the mainstream media that broke this story. It was the New York Times.
Actually, it was the Washington Examiner beat the New York Times. Tim Carney beat him.
Well, we're talking about it because it was in the Times.
That's fair.
Well, now, the interesting thing here is that Democrats like to characterize Mitt Romney as the creature of Wall Street, as the guy who's being funded by Wall Street. And he's obviously the guy they've decided to run against. But the president himself raises a lot of money on Wall Street. How do the two compare?
Well, the president raises more. And I think if Mitt Romney is elected president, he will then have raised more. I think given Wall Street reform in the legislation, it's true that the guys on Wall Street these days might like Mitt Romney more. But Barack Obama is no more separated from the support of Wall Street and the Democrats, primarily Democrats, by the way, who work on Wall Street, than anybody else. And I'd point out that if the economy was doing well and everybody was happy, nobody would care about all of the stories going on about how Obama might be a creature of Wall Street. But because they're down on other things, it then becomes an issue.
I haven't seen any signs in the Occupy Wall Street encampments about Barack Obama.
Well, one of his biggest fans is a large shareholder in the Washington Post, Warren Buffett, who has conducted fundraisers for him on Wall Street. Wall Street is very pragmatic about who they give money to. They are a little bit down on Obama. Some of the guys who gave him a lot of money last time feel betrayed. But out there in the rank and file of Wall Street are plenty of people who want to hedge famous Wall Street word, by giving some money to both sides, and that's how Obama will continue to receive money.
Let me shift topics if I can, Jonah. There were some economic numbers out today that consumer spending went up 0.6% last month. But incomes only rose 0.1%, and they actually declined the previous month, which means that people are spending more, but they're spending out of their savings, and the savings rate dropped to a 4-year low. Now, while spending is good, and we're counting on that to juice the economy a little bit, what happens if people are taking out of their savings? How sustainable is that?
Yeah, no, I think part of it is that they've been delaying purchases for a long time. We've seen savings go up for the last few years in a major way that we hadn't seen before because we used to be not saving at all. I generally think, look, the third quarter was good. You have to admit it when certain quarters are good, so you can be credible when you admit they're bad. And third quarter was good. Business investment was up about just under 17%. That's a big deal. The market did great. It was best October ever. But I don't think anybody in the White House is sitting on their laurels about this. Every time it looks like the economy is going to do one thing, it does another thing. It's been a very ugly couple of years, and I don't think the horror movie is close to over yet.
Let me ask about the European debt deal this week. The stock market yesterday, the Dow Jones went up 3%. People were elated that at least there appeared to be some sign of progress, so it's not clear how it'll work out because you've got lots of protests about austerity plans. But the fact is, there was concern here, and it's been a heavy burden on the stock market and on banks and so forth, because Europe is a big market for the U.S., and if it were to implode because of debt, it would have a major impact on the U.S. economy, wouldn't it?
It would, and that's why this week was a good week. But as we've discussed before, next week could be a bad week. There's still a lot in the European deal they need to work out. The European economy is still troubling. There are other countries that are on the brink there, and so I don't think we yet know if we've escaped peril.
You know, what is hard to understand is that you have a lot of Greeks out in the streets, Italians today as well, and in other nations where they're being forced to impose austerity plans in order to pay for debts. They don't want austerity plans. Who does? But the fact is, they spent money they didn't have, and now someone else controls their fate.
Yes, and that someone might be China, by the way. The Europeans are part of this solution here is to seek foreign funding for the bailout, which could be China, could be the Gulf Arabs, things like that. So as you see this thing going further and further down the road, the prospects for Europe are not only dismal economic growth, but also some gradual loss of control over their own fate, and that should be very troubling to them.
Which I would just point out, Greece defaulted. We're just not calling it that. Greece has defaulted. When you take a 50% haircut on the bonds, that's defaulting. They can't pay. And the idea that this isn't going to spread to Italy and these other places is not persuasive to me at all. We could be in for much worse.
Perhaps a lesson in here for other nations that spend money they don't have. But we won't mention any names. Next up, the Friday lightning round, including the Super Committee, which deals with all that debt, and the World Series.